demonstrating what a native plant garden can look like, it's just going to continue to become more and more popular and more widespread. They really are adapted to Colorado soil. Trying to be more water conscious so there's more to go around. They are easy to grow and they're easy to manage. Some tribes used to call this plant the fourth sister. Don't use the X word. There's a negative connotation with xeriscaping too, because people think it's xeriscaping and it's just rock. I think low water gardening is a much better term. My name is Grace Johnson. I'm Assistant Manager of Horticulture here at Denver Botanic Gardens Chatfield Farms. I've been here for about 6 years and I maintain a lot of our prairie gardens here as well as our plant select demonstration garden and our unirrigated cactus collection as well. So I worked for Missouri Botanical Garden at Shaw Nature Reserve, and that is where I really learned to appreciate native plants, and I saw the amount of life and the amount of pollinators interacting with all of those native plants, and I really fell in love with it. And then I moved here to Colorado and I did see that there is an impending water crisis here in the West, and it's something that we're going to have to be prepared for as gardeners. That's what got me really interested in doing any sort of low water gardening. You know, how do we still have a beautiful garden that requires less water? Low water plants, at least for me, are going to be characterized as plants that are going to use less water than any sort of turf grass installment. So, you know, a lot of golf courses or a lot of turf grass outside of people's homes, that's going to require a lot more water than any sort of native perennial that we have. So when I think about what a low water perennial or a low water native plant is, it's going to be something that's less than any sort of turf grass or bluegrass that people are growing. I got into horticulture in 2013, and that was kind of when I really started to see this native plant movement starting to take place. I think it's really gained traction in the last few years. There's a lot of people moving to the Front Range of Denver, which requires more water for people. In addition, I think people are just becoming more conscious of being sustainable as well as wanting to help out and do their part. Aside from saving water, native plants are also really well adapted to Colorado. They have been living here for thousands of years, so they are adapted to our climates, our extreme weather, high intense UV, intense storms, periods of drought. So those are things that those plants are used to. In addition, pollinators and wildlife that evolved hand in hand with all of these plants. A lot of the wildflowers, a lot of the native perennials are a huge resource for pollinators, and pollinators are so important for our ecosystem, for the food web. They utilize those plants more than they're going to any sort of non-native, highly cultivated plant that's in horticulture. Whenever you are looking to convert turf to garden space and install some native plants, it can be a very daunting task. Just know you don't have to remove the entire lawn at once. You can definitely work in stages. You can smother the turf with cardboard. You could also do a chemical application to remove the turf. Remove a little bit at a time and install plants in the turf's place. You can also leave any irrigation that you have. You can leave it there. You don't have to rip up all of your irrigation in order to create a new garden installation. The type of plants I would recommend in order to replace the lawn, I have an affinity for prairie plants. I really love prairie plants. I think they're really versatile, they're really tough, they're really beautiful, and they're unique as well. So we can take a look at my prairie garden here. Not every single plant in this garden is Colorado native, but a lot of them are regionally native. So this one here that you can see that's just about finished blooming, this is Echinacea pallida. This is a really wonderful native plant. It's native to Kansas, so it's regionally native, but it's very well adapted to Colorado. It's really beautiful, it's very tough, it's easy to grow. And the pollinators love it, and the birds love to forage off of it in the fall and in the winter when it's finished blooming. This plant here is Pearly Everlasting. It is a Colorado native plant. It can reseed a little bit, so keep that in mind if you're thinking of using it, but it's really low maintenance, very easy to grow, and you might even see it out and about whenever you're hiking in Colorado. I wanted to talk about this grass, prairie dropseed. Sporobolus heterolepis is the Latin name. It's one of my favorite grasses. It's really beautiful. It's just about to flower right now, but it has a really beautiful fine texture. And then whenever it's in bloom, people say that it smells like popcorn if you get really close to the flowering stalks here. But it's really beautiful even in the winter time. It's my absolute favorite grass. Another native plant I really love is Monarda fistulosa. It has a really long bloom period. Its common name is bee balm. It's aptly named because a lot of bees really love this plant. And in addition, there's a number of different Monardas that you can get that are on the market. With any sort of new planting, native plants or any kind of new planting, I would recommend just keeping them watered, especially keep an eye on the weather that's going on. So this spring we had a really wet spring, so I didn't have to hand water new plant installations quite as much. But if we are having a really dry year, definitely just keeping an eye on them, keeping them watered, watering them multiple times a week until they're established. That first year is really the grace period that you need to give them and give them a little extra water. And then once they're established, you can really back off on giving them any sort of irrigation, but just making sure they have the moisture they need to get established and grow some strong roots. Native plants aren't going to require any sort of fertilizer, and they aren't going to require any sort of soil amendments. They have what they need in that soil because they are adapted to the soil. So there are a lot of plants that are going to feed pollinators spring through fall, so it's very important to have multiple species of plants that are going to bloom throughout the growing season. That way there's something for pollinators spring, summer, and fall, especially in the fall when resources get more and more sparse for any sort of pollinators. In addition, a lot of native plants also can set seed and feed birds in the fall. So if you leave your plants standing through the fall and the winter and cut them down the following spring, you're going to provide some seed, which is going to be winter forage for birds. A lot of solitary bees actually nest in the stems in cavities of native plants. So leaving those stems standing so they have a place to nest and lay their eggs, and then you can get another round of pollinators the following spring. They do a lot of pollinating for our food crops too, so it's important to have a lot of resources for them via native plants. So deadheading is removing a spent flower head and removing the seed. There are a number of reasons to do any sort of deadheading. The first would be to keep the plant from reseeding. If it is a plant that maybe has reseeded a little bit in your garden and you say that's enough, I don't need any more, you can cut the plant after it's finished flowering so there aren't any other seeds germinating. The other thing that you can do by cutting down the flowers is just to make sure the plant is sending energy into the roots. So it's focusing on root growth as opposed to focusing energy on seed production. And also it can be aesthetically pleasing as well if you're really trying to look for a maintained, manicured look in the garden. That's another great reason to do any sort of deadheading. The time of year I'm going to recommend pruning down your plants, cutting them down for the following season is going to be late spring. People who are very concerned about solitary bees or other sort of pollinators sheltering within your garden, a lot of those people are going to wait until the last frost to do any sort of cutting down. My case is a little different simply because this is a botanical garden. There's certain expectations of how the gardens need to look. So for me, I'm usually going to start cutting things down mid to late March. But you can wait as long as late April to do any sort of removing of the plants to flush things back out. Great. This is Asclepias incarnata. It's my favorite milkweed. Milkweeds are essential to the life cycle of a monarch butterfly. We do get monarchs here in Colorado, and this seems to be their favorite one, at least that I've seen anecdotally. I haven't done any scientific studies on it, but it does seem like the monarchs come and they flock to this one. They lay their eggs on this one, and their caterpillars love to eat the foliage. But all sorts of pollinators, as you can see, we've got a little fly right here, enjoy the flowers. But it's really tough, it's easy to grow, and it's my favorite Asclepias. This is Cleome cerulata. It is one of my favorite native plants. You actually will see it whenever you're driving through roadsides and ditches. It's really easy to grow. This is actually an annual, so this will reseed and give you new baby plants each year. But the pollinators absolutely love it, and it has a historical value as well. Native American tribes used to use this plant as a spinach whenever the leaves are young and tender. Apparently it is edible. Do your research first before you grab a plant and start eating it, however. But some tribes used to call this plant the fourth sister. So corn, beans, and squash were grown together. And then some tribes use this as the fourth sister to attract pollinators to their squash plants. So it has a really wonderful historical value, but it's really beautiful, it's really tough. And if it's in an irrigated bed, it can get all the way to 6 feet tall. Most of the plants that I work with that are native are going to be perennials. I definitely like to supplement with some reseeding annuals, things like prickly poppy, that's a reseeding annual that's native here, that it's just nice to fill little spaces in the garden. It kind of moves around a little bit. But for the most part, I recommend perennials just because they're going to come back year after year, give you the most bang for your buck, and just occupy the space for longer. You're going to have to be site specific with your plant selection. So if you have dry shade or if you have full sun or part shade, just keep that in mind anytime you are picking plants. Just make sure you're checking the growth requirements for any of those perennials that you choose. Make sure you're choosing right plant, right place. It's hard to find a lot of native plants for sale, and it's very limited. And so I think that that's a big limiting factor for people who want to install native plants. They don't know where to get them, and that's a problem. So the more demand there is for native plants, the more nurseries will grow them. Contacting your local nursery or contacting a wholesale grower and saying, hey, I want more native plants, I want access to native plants, that would help with the limited availability. So Denver Botanic Gardens has a plant sale every spring. It's over Mother's Day weekend. There's always a lot of diversity of plants that are for sale, including a ton of native plants. I know our propagation team has really been trying to focus on growing native plants for our plant sale specifically. I also know the Colorado Native Plant Society does a plant sale as well, so those would be my jumping off points for people. Any sort of Western native is going to serve you well. The Plant Select program, which is a partnership with Denver Botanic Gardens, CSU, and local propagators, they do a great job of promoting native plants and plants that are going to thrive here in Colorado. So I would definitely install some Plant Select plants that are native, and I would check out their website for any sort of resource. This plant is Euphorbia marginata. This is another reseeding annual that's really great to supplement some of your perennials to help fill any void spaces and move around a little bit. It's really beautiful. Snow on the Mountain is its common name. As you can see, it's got some white variegation on it, but it's really beautiful, and I love this plant. Another milkweed that's really well adapted to Colorado and easy to grow is Asclepias tuberosa here, the orange one. As you can see, there's some pollinators, there's some bees foraging on it right now. It's probably one of the most showy milkweeds you can get. Definitely a great specimen for any native plant garden. Climate change, that's definitely something that's going to be changing things for the foreseeable future. Water is going to be limited, as well as access to water. It doesn't mean we have to give up gardening by any means, but we do have to be a little more conscious about our gardening practices. There's a lot of potential for the future with native plants, and more nurseries getting on board, growing native plants for people to purchase, and gardens like Denver Botanic Gardens demonstrating what a native plant garden can look like, giving people ideas. It's a great resource for people, and I think it's just going to continue to become more and more popular and more widespread.